We have, and Nick talked about how important architecture is and placemaking, and we have from Perkins+Will, Geeti Silwal. She is the head of urban design and planning practice at Perkins+Will's West Coast region in San Francisco. She's based out of San Francisco, but she has a great deal of knowledge, not only about station area placemaking strategies, but she has put this into practice, and so we're very fortunate to have Geeti come down and join us today, and let's welcome her.
Thank you, Catherine. Great. I wanted to kind of take a step back to help you all and basically take you through the kind of approach Perkins+Will applies to station architecture and station area planning in general. So just taking this cover slide for a second here, for us, it's important to kind of really craft the narrative of what's a successful station and what's a successful station area. So thinking of it from the perspective of an individual, me, you, anybody, taking the journey, how do we make it a memorable journey for the user? And how do we, once they arrive at the destination, how do we make it a really welcoming and an engaging destination? So that's pretty much the thesis of the presentation that I'll share with you. And very briefly, for those of you who don't know Perkins+Will, we are a research-based global design practice and span across 24 cities in the world. And we bring a very diverse and varied lens to thinking through station architecture and station area planning, primarily with our transit architecture expertise, our urban design, urban planning expertise, and our branding and environment that do wayfinding and signage, and our interiors. Talking about the success of TODs. So I know, Nick, you kind of used the word transit-oriented communities. We love to kind of call it transit-integrated development. So taking it a step beyond transit-oriented, how do we talk about it as transit-integrated? And we look at it primarily from three basic lenses: placemaking, mobility, and at the center of both, the user experience. How do we craft a narrative here to really make the experience very enjoyable for all users, be it everyday commuters, to people actually living in these transit districts, to people visiting your city for the first time and arriving at that destination? It's a dilemma. Good mobility or urban mobility destinations sometimes might not actually provide for good urbanity. So how do you balance that, and how do you really address both placemaking and a seamless mobility experience is really important to us. Just for a minute, talking about placemaking. What is placemaking? It's important for us to create a context where these stations are. In many cases, if they happen to be in the center of the cities, it is great. We can build on those contexts and make sure that whatever is added in the transit district actually provides for a mix of users that's diverse, and it catalyzes more development to provide the right kind of vibrancy. And by really making the stations accessible, visible, creating them as welcoming gateways and iconic landmarks, it actually helps in the experience of this place and helps increase transit ridership. Placemaking primarily looks at how we think of very creatively mixing of uses, and how do we create these vibrant urban environments which are 24/7 in these cases. If the transit is running 24 hours, we want to make sure that anybody using the transit at any time of the day feels safe, comfortable, and is always in an environment that they are engaged in. So through the slide deck here, I'm actually taking you through some of the research we've done in very successful European train destinations, and also some of the work that Perkins+Will has been working on. So, taking a look at King's Cross and the St. Pancras neighborhood in London, if you really imagine what it used to be, or if you know what it used to be 20 years back, it was a real derelict rail yards area which was full of crime. And now it has, and it's 67 acres of land that is next to, let me find a pointer here. Next to, St. Pancras here and King's Cross Station here. And all of the 67 acres behind it has now become such a huge potential and to be a great, vibrant, mixed-use inner core for London. And it's a great mix of uses of open spaces and educational uses in corporate campuses. So learning from these precedents and informing how we can also think about as we kind of welcome high-speed rail into our cities, and as we look at the metro areas transforming, in the Bay Area, the BOT areas transforming, how do we think of them to be equally vibrant? Again, back to the King's Cross neighborhood, this is right next to the train station, King's Cross train station, which is right here. And this is the Google headquarters in London. And the Universal Music Group is moving there with 1,000 of its employees in June. So it's really become a hub for tech and media and retail and entertainment, and a lot of leisure spaces. Almost 40% of the 67 acres is actually open space that's been programmed to welcome the city in and make their arrival to the station or the departure be not just about commuting, but be about actually enjoying city life and actually being able to socialize and linger with their friends, to be, when they arrive at the station, to be at the destination itself. This is, again, at King's Cross, the educational facility, which is the University of Arts of London's campus, has an open space right in the foreground, which is open to the community all the time, and it's a great civic open space. One of our projects down in San Francisco in Mission Bay, it's the work that we are doing with the San Francisco Giants. 22 acres of land, which is just a parking lot, how we think through the transformation of that parking lot to be a really rich experience for people who come to the ball game or for people who are just living there, thinking through that narrative of what's the experience of the ground floor REM for people is so important for us to kind of curate as we think through these transit integrated development projects. Building on what is unique to those sites, building a unique identity. How do we look at diverse uses, be inclusive when we think about uses? So make sure we actually make possible some industrial uses to happen. How do we readapt some of the buildings that are on the site? And at the same time, how do we create the open space that's required in any dense urban situation? When you don't have a front yard and your backyard, you need to provide for some area of respite. How do we craft that REM? Marine Gateway in Vancouver, looking at a real suburban location which has a transit line with the station right there. And the next slide will show you it's a built project for us. 2 residential towers, 1 commercial tower with a podium that has retail and dining and restaurants, and all integrated with the elevated light rail station, which is right there. So it's, again, completely integrated into the thinking of the station architecture itself. The experience is, again, one of complete comfort, very engaging, very pleasant, and very vibrant, so that there's a feeling of safety as people use these areas. In Toronto, looking at area, this was 24 acres in right next to the Union Station, and seeing what is possible given the proximity to Union Station in Toronto. How do we look at real intense neighborhoods, but at the same time provide for a great ground floor rim. We're working with for high-speed rail, California high-speed rail, in a very small role where we're looking at the station area access plan as part of the Bakersfield supplemental environmental planning that's happening. And how we think of, going back a second, how we think of leveraging the potential of the land as the train station, as it receives the train station, and how do we identify opportunities for growth around it. There is a lot of possibilities for Bakersfield to kind of really transform. In Sacramento Valley Station, which will be the terminus for high-speed rail and on the north end, again, sitting in an area which is not necessarily completely embraced as part of the city right now, primarily because it's got a lot of infrastructure and a lot of it, but it's emerging as a new neighborhood. And what we're doing for this project is looking at all the successful stations, and these are just two examples: Denver Union Station, San Francisco Trans Bay, Scott, you just talked about it, and studying the metrics and trying to understand what makes it vibrant and vital. So if you just focus on the numbers in red, how many residents live within a mile, or within half a mile? How many jobs are there within half a mile? And applying that metrics to help us think about what is the kind of mix of users we want to bring in any new station area that we want to think about. And we do realize that to help with the ridership for the transit, it is important to actually have jobs, a higher job number to residents that helps with the ridership. And so for Sacramento, we felt that just looking at examples from, sorry, you can't even read it. These are stations in Denver, London, Melbourne, and of course Transbay, to help us understand that a job ratio of 6 jobs to 1 resident is actually a good mix to create that kind of 24/7 vibrancy. Again, these are metrics that we are constantly researching to help us design for that environment. On the mobility, I'll touch lightly. There's a lot of conversation that's happened on this, but it is so important to make sure that we provide both visibility and accessibility and connectivity in, out, and through the station, so that the stations act as connectors and as bridges rather than dividers and barriers. Rail infrastructure by nature tends to be dividing communities, but how can we think of them, design for them to be about bridging communities and bridging barriers? And how do we make it intuitive and efficient? And how do we make sure that parking is not necessarily the predominant use around these stations, but you actually are able to capture the land value to increase intensity of uses around it? In fact, most of the case studies we looked at in Europe, there was 0 parking in most of these transit districts. You just get there by transit, other transit. How do we look at complete streets where we have multimodal access in and around this area? And how do we prepare for let me just go back. How do we prepare for the changing mobility trends? I'm knowing that mobility on demand services are increasing, autonomous vehicles are increasing. How do we plan for these areas to actually be able to receive that and be future-proof to be able to run with those changing mobility trends? This is a station in Berlin. The reason I bring it up here is how it has stacked the different uses, pretty much like how Transbay has done, to actually have more of a regional train right on the elevated level and a more local train right at the bottom, but it has got retail in the floors between. So again, it's a civic destination and it's a retail environment at the same time. You're also able to hop on a train if you want to. Looking at intelligent mobility stations and in making the journey for the people very, very seamless and very hassle-free, and making sure that people are not stressed about taking is so important in thinking through station architecture and the station area planning. This is an example from Berlin, where they have the system installed for actually being able to have an app, download an app, and be able to, the rail company itself provides the electric bikes and the electric cars, so it's just one seamless provider. User experience, the last but not the least, is actually very important to kind of think through. How do we provide for the diverse mix of users? How do we build on the existing culture and create a distinct identity for each of the stations? This, again, an example from St. Pancras is these restaurants, these people are not going to take the transit at all. They don't have, they don't have any trolleys next to them. They're here just to meet a friend and have lunch. So how do these destinations become about everyday people visiting them and be more than just commuters? I have lots of examples here, but again, it all basically talks about how we prioritize the user to be able to move through these spaces is as important as how we create the look and feel and the iconic expression of these transit station. Example from the work we did in Ottawa on the Confederation line is the Arrival Plaza, how we should make it a very welcoming public space. The public life in this public space is important. How we help craft that narrative and allow for that, enable that to happen is important. Ferry building, if you really look at it, is a ferry terminal. It's a transit building, but who knows it as a transit building? You know it as a place where there are farmers market, and you know it as a place where you go get some of the most gourmet food and the gourmet chocolates and the cheese, and that's what's memorable for people. So but we take ferries from there, and that's actually a transportation center. How do we kind of view in culture and art into these stations? And I have a few slides from the station in Liege in Belgium. It's a beautiful expression, and it's a great icon for the city. And it's actually, the whole roof structure is so grand and so generous. It makes the entire station extremely permeable. Where the station is and where the open space is, it kind of blends and blurs those edges to be a gathering place for people. And none of these people sitting on the steps probably are going up to take a strain, but it's a great place to hang and meet friends. And at the same time, as you look at the architecture of the building, it really celebrates natural light, it celebrates natural ventilation to be part of the wayfinding and signage. So it makes it intuitive for people to move towards light, and that's a path. Instead of having too many graphics and too many signage, how do we think of design to tell that story? And it's an opportunity for us to think of these stations as we are looking at our communities and transforming them to be equally receptive and equally able to designing that. Most of these districts are big opportunities right in the center of the city. So just for a minute, I want to say that thinking about sustainability and district sustainability is so important. We shouldn't miss the boat, and making sure we think about it as a place where we can look to prioritize health and well-being for people, really focus on the aspects of how we reduce auto trips, and hence reduce carbon emissions, greenhouse emissions, and how do we really protect and enhance the ecosystems. All of these are goals for almost every project that we touch on. And it's important to remember that to get to carbon neutrality, almost 55% of the goal can be met by just focusing on good transportation connectivity and on building the right kind of buildings, which is pretty much what we all do. So it's all under our realm to kind of thinking about ways to reduce the carbon footprint through alternative modes of transportation, through reduction of parking, through energy efficient buildings, district energy systems, and alternative energy uses. That's where we are with the transit integrated development.